Welcome to this explainer. You know, as a paleontologist, there's absolutely nothing quite as thrilling as reconstructing a world that's been gone for millions of years. Today, we're going on an expedition. It's a journey deep into time. I want you to just retreat into the depths of your imagination for a second. Imagine I've just strapped you into a time machine and we are traveling back, way back, 6 to 9 million years to late Miocene Argentina. Our mission? To uncover the true scale and the everyday lifestyle of the absolute pinnacle of avian dinosaurs. We are tracking down the largest bird to ever take to the skies, Argentavis magnificens.
So think about those very first few steps out of the time machine. If I told you a prehistoric creature was currently hunting you, where exactly are you going to look first? You'd probably nervously peer back and forth, right? Maybe scanning the tall grass for some prehistoric nightmare charging straight at you. Or, I don't know, maybe you'd check the water. The point is, with the predators we're used to today, we generally don't expect the ultimate danger to come from the sky. And yet, here in prehistoric Argentina, all those millions of years ago, looking up is exactly what you needed to do. The ultimate predator in this ecosystem didn't stalk through the grass. It circled high above.
To really wrap our heads around this creature, we have to bridge the deep past with modern discovery. The late Miocene epoch provided just the perfect stage for this giant to reign, but then, right around 6.8 million years ago, it just abruptly vanished from the fossil record. Poof, gone. Fast forward to the year 1980, and this creature finally blipped onto our scientific radar. A team of paleontologists from the Museum de la Plata actually stumbled upon a holotype in the La Pampa province. They found a skull, a quadrate bone, and some various pieces of the legs and arms. Now, the bones had been pretty badly crushed by time. They were super fragmentary, but man, did they tell an incredible story.
Section 1. Unearthing the silver bird.
When you're dealing with a fossil that has literally been crushed by millions of years of geological pressure, evaluating it takes some really intense morphological work. But even from those initial damaged bones, the team could tell three things for sure. 1, they had found a bird. 2, it was an entirely new species. And 3, it was unbelievably huge. They named it Argentavis magnificens, which roughly translates to the magnificent Argentine bird or the magnificent silver bird. Now, in paleontology, estimating true size from limited material is always a bit tricky. Early estimates were kind of wild, suggesting an almost 25-foot wingspan, but modern, rigorously modeled estimates have grounded that just a bit. Today, we know that fully grown individuals had a wingspan of about 6 meters. That's nearly 20 feet. That is almost double the wingspan of the current largest living flying bird, the wandering albatross.
It's one thing to hear the number 20 feet, but to really visualize this beast, imagine looking up into the clouds and seeing a bird the exact width of a small passenger bus soaring over your head. I mean, if you parked a small Cessna light aircraft on the runway, Argentavis could literally match it wingtip to wingtip. No joke.
And it wasn't just wide either. It was incredibly dense. It was robust. The maximum reasonable estimates place its weight at around 72 kilograms or 159 pounds. That is the weight of a mid-sized jaguar, just up in the air. To put that in perspective, the golden eagle, which modern hunters use to take down literal wolves in Mongolia, is over 10 times lighter than Argentavis. It also completely outclasses its only winged prehistoric rival, the supersized seagull Pelagornis, which had a massive wingspan but was only about half the weight.
So, to keep a jaguar-weighted bird airborne, you need some serious surface area. When fully extended, the wings of Argentavis took up an area of about 91 square feet. There's a brilliant quote that highlights this perfectly. 91 square feet of wing area, larger than some New York City studio apartments. Just picture the sheer volume of feathers and muscle required to operate a living, breathing sail of that magnitude. It's mind-blowing.
Section 2. Scavenger or active predator.
Okay, let's dive into a bit of a behavioral dilemma here. How exactly did a bird of this size feed itself in prehistoric South America? Was it a massive menace, or was it just an opportunistic cleaner of the plains? Did it hunt like an eagle in the sky, or scavenge on the ground like a vulture? This is exactly the kind of puzzle that forces us to think deeply like a paleontologist. We have to analyze the beak and the leg morphologies to solve the mystery of its diet. Historically, because it's closely related to modern New World vultures, scientists naturally assumed it acted like one. But as we looked closer at the anatomy, the story totally shifted.
Our understanding of this giant's behavior has evolved a ton over time. Older theories pegged it as a scavenger or a kleptoparasite, basically a giant bully that used its sheer size, razor-sharp beak, and talents to steal already hunted prey from other predators. But the modern paleontological consensus leans in a much more active direction. See, Argentavis actually had a pretty lightly built frame relative to its size, making it a rather weak flapper. It couldn't gracefully hunt midair like an eagle does. Instead, it had these relatively long, powerful, sturdy legs. This heavily suggests it was a ground-stalking predator. It would land and physically chase its prey down on foot. It even had a highly flexible mouth capable of creating a massive gape, literally big enough to swallow a full-sized hare entirely whole in one swift gulp. Honestly, not even a wolf can pull that off.
When we map out the local ecosystem and the Miocene food web it was navigating, we see it had pretty fair pickings of smaller prey, things like rodents, reptiles, and litopterns, which were these ancient hoofed mammals. And it didn't have much to fear from most mammalian predators, like the saber-toothed Thylacosmilus, which were vastly smaller and just no match for Argentavis. But the real competition on the ground was genuinely terrifying. I'm talking about the Devensensia. This was a 7.9-foot-tall, bear-sized terror bird that weighed up to 770 pounds. Armed with a giant crushing beak, this was the one local predator that our magnificent silverbird absolutely had to actively avoid while it was hunting on the ground.
Section 3. The mechanics of giant flight. So if it's stalking prey on the ground and dodging literal bear-sized terror birds, how on earth did it ever get back up into the sky? Taking off at that size was basically like launching an airplane. It couldn't just casually flap its way upward from a standstill. First, it needed to achieve a speed of 25 miles per hour. That's practically Usain Bolt's top sprinting speed. To do this, it most likely had to throw itself off cliffs and steep drops, or run fiercely into very strong headwinds. Once it was finally airborne, its weak flapping abilities meant it had to rely totally on environmental assistance. It sought out columns of warm, rising air called thermals. It would ride these invisible air elevators upward and then just glide for vast distances to conserve its energy.
And this brings us to a really crucial ecological contrast. Prehistoric Argentina was significantly warmer than it is today. The late Miocene climate provided plentiful, strong, warm thermals that acted as those essential air elevators. If you tried to plop an Argentavis into our cooler, modern environment right now, it simply wouldn't have the constant, powerful thermal lift required to keep 72 kilograms of mass suspended in the sky. It would exhaust itself instantly. It was a master of its very specific sky, entirely dependent on the specific climate of its era.
Because it could harness these winds so perfectly, it developed some incredible traits as an apex survivor. It had telescopic, eagle-like vision to spot prey all the way from up in the clouds. It possessed a powerful sense of smell, able to detect the distinct odors of deceased animals up to a full mile away. It also required a massive roaming territory to sustain itself. Paleontologists estimate a single bird's domain was around 500 square kilometers. For context, that's a territory larger than the entire city of Philadelphia. And finally, to make sure the next generation was tough enough to survive, they laid incredibly massive eggs. We're talking eggs weighing a full kilo, roughly the size of an ostrich egg. Now, hatching from a 1-kilo egg is really just the beginning of the battle. What's absolutely fascinating is that chicks are believed to have stayed in the nest for an unusually long 16 months. Think about that. Many modern bird chicks leave the nest in well under a year. But mastering the incredibly tricky physics of giant flight took serious time, and they needed to stay put and grow large enough so that ground predation from those massive terror birds became less of a threat before they finally ventured out.
Section 4. Climate Change and Extinction.
So let's move into our final chapter and see how this all builds to a pretty tragic conclusion. Because despite all these highly specialized adaptations, around 6.8 million years ago, this magnificent giant was just completely erased from the fossil record. It's the ultimate paleontological cold case. There was no giant asteroid impact. There was no sudden influx of rival predators that wiped them out. Instead, Mother Nature simply turned down the thermostat. Global cooling radically shifted the late Miocene climate. And as temperatures dropped, those powerful warm thermals, the very air elevators Argentavis fundamentally relied on to lift its 159-pound body, began to vanish. Without the wind beneath its wings, the magnificent silver bird was, quite literally, grounded forever. It's a really stark reminder, isn't it? It shows us just how perfectly adapted an animal can become to its environment, yet how utterly vulnerable it is when that environment suddenly changes. We look at this massive, 20-foot-wide king of the Miocene skies brought down by nothing more than the cooling of the air. And it leaves us with this final, provocative thought for today's explainer. If a mere change in the wind can permanently ground the largest flying creature in Earth's entire history, what prehistoric giants might our own shifting climate erase tomorrow?